Cain by Lord Byron. Ho, 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 Lord Byron. You know, normally I like to provide a brief background for the author of whatever work it is which I'm reviewing, but I'm not entirely sure if that's necessary in this case. Because Lord Byron's reputation, I'm sure, precedes him. You may already be familiar with the man, English lord and sometime politician and writer, who is now regarded as being among the greatest of English poets and probably the greatest of the Romantics. And he led quite the romantic life. He lived fast and died young of medical complications while, of all things, fighting in the Greek War for Independence. And he left quite the legacy. He is also, I think, one of the probably greatest chads in history. I mean, that dude clapped the cheeks of so many ladies. I mean, just truly legendary Chad material. He is also, I think, probably the greatest celebrity writer of all time. I mean, he was a rock star of his day. Um, and another element of his legacy is that he was the progenitor of what is known as the Byronic hero, which denotes a kind of edgy, moody anti hero whose personality traits are largely modeled on those of Byron himself, and which Cain stands as a prime example of. So, my personal exposure to the works of Lord Byron is actually pretty small, even though I obviously have been familiar with him and his work and his life, and just how dramatic that is in its own right. But really, I haven't really read that much of his works. I remember years ago reading some of Don Juan, or really, I guess I should say Don Juan, if you pronounce it like he tells us to pronounce it in the work. I think I read like a canto or two of that, but really, I just found that a little bit too cheeky for my taste, a little bit too glib. Not as much. I didn't seem to get as much substance out of that as I was hoping for. And also, I have read She Walks in Beauty, which is a brief little poem of his. But by and large, I haven't really explored that much of Byron's work. So I decided to pick up a couple of his dramas, one of which being Cain. Now, Cain is not typically pointed to as being Byron's masterpiece. That usually seems to be Don Juan or Don Juan that most people say is his masterpiece, but I'm not really sure about that. I think Don Juan or Don Juan is pointed to as Byron's magnum opus simply because that's the hardest that Byron ever Byroned. I mean, it was nothing more than a vehicle for Byron to express himself poetically, literarily, and he did that quite well in Don Juan, but for me, like I said, I just found it a little bit too cheeky at times, not the most substantive thing that I'd ever encountered. But while Cain is not pointed to very often, if ever, as being Byron's true masterpiece, it was certainly the most controversial thing of his time that he wrote, because this thing was denounced in pulpits all across England and probably all across Europe more broadly. This stirred up quite the controversy to the extent that Byron had to kind of write apologies for it and say, it's just a work of art. We have to separate the art from the artist. I don't necessarily hold the opinions which the characters in the work do. It's kind of like, when the Rolling Stones released Sympathy for the Devil. Everybody was all like, they're freaking devil worshippers. It's kind of like that. It's like, we got to separate the art from the artist, or at least that's what Byron kind of hid behind at the time. Just throw up his hands like, it's just a work of art. However, I'm not entirely sure if that's completely honest, because I think that this is a deeply, deeply insightful glimpse into Byron's mindset. And it is a very, very fascinating and very, very powerful work, brief though it is, because it is a very brief work. It's only, I think, like 1,800 lines long. It's poetry, needless to say. So it's very brief, but dang, it packs quite the punch. And I'm going to tell you all about it. So join me, won't you, as I take a dive into Lord Byron's closet drama, Cain. So, what is the story of Cain about? Well, if the title didn't clue you in, it is a kind of retelling and more fleshed out rendition of the story of Cain and Abel from the book of Genesis. Cain, I hope you know, you should know, slew Abel and became the first murderer in Christian mythology, at least in human history. But Byron seeks to kind of flesh that out a bit more and to moreover twist the story on its head so that Cain is not just a despicable villain, but rather a tragic anti hero, not unlike what John Milton did with the character of Satan in Paradise Lost. And it should be noted that many of the romantics were very, very heavily inspired by John Milton's Paradise Lost. In particular, the character of Satan, which, contrary to how John Milton wanted the character to be viewed, many of the romantics viewed the character of Satan as the real hero of the work, a nonconformist who will not submit to any authority except his own, which they found quite admirable. What John Milton intended to do in Paradise Lost by making pride and ambition and defiance be things that were lamentable, the romantics later actually came to view as laudable. And last year, I would say, I read another work by another romantic poet, a contemporary and actually friend of Byron's, and that would be Percy Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. This right here actually ended up being one of the worst things that I read last year. And I'm not going to go into that here. You can watch my review of that if you want. But needless to say, Prometheus Unbound took the whole satanic motif from Paradise Lost and kind of just did something not very compelling with it. I thought it's not a very good work. I don't think it not only does the poetry kind of just a little bit much. It also indulges in what I think is just some fanciful utopian politicizing, which Byron in Cain thankfully does not do. In fact, Cain is not an optimistic work at all. It is a very, very pessimistic and cynical work, but it is all the more powerful for that. So when the play opens, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and their wives, who are also their sisters. And that also harkens to an element of Byron's real life, because among the many women whose cheeks he clapped, one of them was his half sister. And so there's actually, it kind of make a little issue of the incest in this play. The fact that Cain is sleeping with and married to his own sister, which is, again, parallels Byron's real life kind of uncomfortably, perhaps. But anyway, so Adam and Eve and their children are performing a sacrifice at the beginning of the work. And they're all praising and thanking God, but Cain ain't having any of it. He's like, I hate it here. Life sucks. I have nothing to be thankful for, and I'm not sacrificing shit. So they're all like, you really need to work on that mindset, son. And then Cain wanders off and runs into Lucifer. He just bumps into the Prince of Darkness, and then Lucifer is kind of a kindred spirit to Cain, because Cain is a very angsty and kind of tumultuous character, and he sees kind of, again, a kindred spirit, pun intended, in Lucifer. So Lucifer is like, "You want to see some cool shit?" And he's like, "Hell yeah!" So then they whisk off on a little time and space spanning journey where Lucifer takes Cain to outer space and shows him the immensity of the universe and also shows him his own insignificance. And then he takes him to the underworld. And he also shows him the things about the world that happened before man was created. It really does get dangerously close to being like what you might denote as Lovecraftian, as Lucifer's like, what, you thought that your world was the first? You're just like God's latest little experiment. Which unsettles Cain. And also Cain sees what I think is meant to be like the ghosts of dinosaurs, if I'm interpreting that correctly. He sees that the forms of creatures, monstrous, like very alien looking creatures that lived on Earth before humans did, which I think it's supposed to be like dinosaurs, which is cool. And so Cain is even more disillusioned with his own existence by this point when he is returned to where he was at the beginning of the play. And then Abel, his brother, his do-gooder kind of brother, comes up to him and is like, "You need to atone for your sinful nature, and you need to make sacrifices like I do." But Cain is like, "I'm not sacrificing anything. I don't have anything to be thankful for. I wish I had never been born." There's kind of some real like antenatal sentiments in this, which I wasn't expecting. But Cain is not a glass half full kind of character. He really resents the existence which he is made to endure. But Abel persists, and Cain is like, "Fine, whatever." So Abel, if you know the story like from the Bible, Abel is a shepherd, and Cain is a farmer, and so they sacrifice their respective products. And God, of course, is only happy with Abel, and so he kind of just ignores Cain's sacrifice and expresses some displeasure at that. And Cain is like, "Well, I guess we're even more at odds than I thought." And then Abel is like, "You got to do better. You got to do like I do." And so then Abel just like pesters him and pesters him and pesters him. And then Cain finally just snaps, and it's like, to quote the AC/DC song, "If you want blood, you got it." So then he beats Abel to death, and then quickly is horrified by his own actions, and then is branded with the mark of Cain, and then is exiled with his family, his incestuous family. And that's the play. That is Cain. It kind of does what John Milton did for the character of Satan in Paradise Lost by creating a much more fleshed out backstory, except it does it for the character of Cain. Now, there is a lot going on in this work. It is, despite its brevity, it is a quite involved work, and there's a lot of stuff at play in the play. First of all, and most prominently, Byron is really wrestling with the problem of evil in this work. Cain is very disgruntled at the way that things stand and the world that he has inherited, which is, very harsh, very brutal. And he is, moreover, perplexed as to why he has to be punished for what his father and mother did. And he is kind of just holding this up and pointing out the seeming unfairness of this and saying, "What did I do to deserve all this?" It's a very human sentiment at the heart of this play, of not only of wondering why evil has to be, and whether evil is truly fully attributable to man or the devil, or whether the creator of everything would thereby have to bear some kind of responsibility for evil's existence. But also, Cain is just hurt by the fact that he has to suffer for something that he didn't do. It's very poignant. It's very moving, I found. But beyond that, Byron is also engaging in this play in some very subtle but nonetheless very incisive biblical criticism, not only of the morality of it, but also of the lore. But on the moral note, I would say this: Byron expresses something in this play which I don't think uh, a lot of people probably at that time had expressed, and that is the suffering of animals, the suffering that is inherent in nature. This just kind of caught me off guard because humans have, theologians have wrestled with the problem of evil and human suffering for ages. But Byron actually in Cain points out that animals suffer vastly more by and large than humans do, and that nature is not very benevolent. And so that we kind of have to question what happened to the supposed benevolence, that created all this if the animals have to suffer for, again, what they didn't do, just like Cain has to suffer for what he didn't do. I didn't expect that, honestly. It kind of caught me off guard, but it was a welcome little surprise, and shows kind of an astuteness on Byron's part. But also, Byron is kind of critiquing the lore of Christianity and the way that it has kind of been retconned. Because when Cain runs into Lucifer in this, he's like, "You're the devil. You were the snake that tempted my mother." And he's like, "Yo, dog, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. That wasn't me at all." Because if you read Genesis, there is no mention of Satan or anything. It's just a snake. And he's like, lay that blame where it should be laid, not at my feet, because I didn't do it. And so Byron is again kind of pointing out how that was retconned later in the mythology, and also Lucifer on their little journey, on the journey that he takes Cain on, alludes to like New Testament stuff, like Jesus and stuff, and he alludes to that, but also he alludes to like hell and eternal punishment, and also as well the existence of like an undying soul. And Cain is like, "Wait, what? What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I guess that doesn't come till later." So again, it's Byron kind of picking holes in the edifice of Christian belief, kind of. But it also even gets kind of Lovecraftian as Cain is made to bear witness to his own insignificance um, in the face of everything. Um, and it's really a remarkable work. But also one thing about the work which is very very effective is the use of irony. You see, in one of the major elements of like classical tragedy is the use of irony, of a character trying to escape something only to be confronted with that something later on. It's like in like Oedipus Rex, right? Oedipus is trying to avert the prophecy of killing his father and sleeping with his own mother, or trying to know whether that prophecy can be averted, only to realize that it was already fulfilled all along. Again, irony. And as well, you can see it in like Macbeth, right, with Shakespeare. Macbeth is given these vague prophecies at the beginning, which he thinks makes him like invincible, but then at the end, he realizes just how direly he misinterpreted things. Again, it's one of the major features of classical tragedy is the poignant use of irony. And Cain uses irony very, very effectively, I think, because one of the major themes of this work is death anxiety. Cain is very, very um, afraid of death because he doesn't really know what death is. Again, prior to Cain killing Abel, um, no human, again, if you're following like scripture, no human had actually died. So Cain isn't really sure what death even is. And like one of the most kind of um, intriguing passages in this is when Cain is talking to Lucifer, and he's like, "I don't know what death is," and he's like, "I think it's like a person." He's like, "I think it's like something that comes for you in the night," and he's like, "I've set up so many nights like watching, trying to keep an eye out." But then at the end of the play, when Cain beats Abel to death and kills his own brother, then he has like Oppenheimer Bhagavad Gita moment where he's like, "Now I am become death." He sees um, what death truly is, and that death in this case is him. It's very, very powerful, and it's very, very effective. And really, it's just kind of a very it's an example of a big thing in a small package, because though it's brief, this work really does cover some ground, and it covers a lot of ideas as well. Now, as for the technical aspects of Cain, the writing, the poetry is good. I mean, it's Byron. I mean, he was a good poet, and unlike Percy Shelley, his contemporary, who went a little bit overboard. No, not a little bit, like a lot overboard in his little satanic influenced work. Byron doesn't write inscrutably. Every line has clear and apparent meaning, but it's very well worded, and it's very affectingly worded. It's very moving at times. In fact, when Cain actually kills Abel at the end of this, and when he has his little moment of clarity at the end, it's very, very powerful. It's very, very moving, and the language is quite lofty at times in this. So, no complaints um, as to that. Now, as to the characters, Cain is a very complex character in this. And also, the character of Lucifer in this is also an interesting character. And one really gets the impression reading this that this work is essentially just Byron talking to himself, that Cain and Lucifer are two different aspects of Byron's persona. Cain is very angsty and bitter about his situation, and is really lamenting his own existence. Whereas conversely, Lucifer tells Cain, he's like, fight, don't ever give in, don't ever submit to anything. He's like, stick it out, stand your ground, never give in. And one, again, really gets the impression that these are just two aspects of Byron himself. The one that's kind of more confused and, again, angsty, and then the other part that's much more of the kind of Byronic um, element that's like, never give in, fight to the last. You are the captain of your own ship, so to speak. But Cain and Lucifer are the real centerpieces of this. And they're good characters. Cain is a very good character, and he's a character that I think we can all see a lot of ourselves in. And as a result of this, I think this work is a very universal work. I think that people, anyone who reads this, may be confronted, perhaps uncomfortably so, with just how much of themselves they may see in the character of Cain. And it's very, very tragic, and it's also tragic because at the end, Abel is by far the more gentle, kind of even-tempered brother, but Cain kills him, and so Cain and his wife are like the ones who are going to um, theoretically spawn the rest of humanity. And as Cain is being exiled, he kind of laments the fact that the gentler soul was killed, and now that maybe humanity is kind of so messed up. Byron is kind of saying with the ending, because it's Cain's blood, it's a legacy of Cain, if you will. But yeah, very tragic. But the actual like structure of the story and how it goes, I do have a couple of criticisms of. It is not a perfect work, I don't think, even though I did really respond to this well. Um, it could have been longer. Again, it is very, very short. You can read this in like an hour or two. And really, it could have been longer. And also, just the way that the story develops feels kind of random. Like Cain just bumps into Lucifer, and then they just go off on this journey, and then Cain is just like teleported back inexplicably to where he was. It just feels kind of random at times, and I think it could have been a little bit more fully rendered if there had been a little bit more material added to it. But really, minor complaints, just has to do with the structure of it. Overall, it is a very, very striking and impressive work, and one that I'm very glad that I read. So, Cain by Lord Byron. I'm going to give Cain An A minus. I think this is an immensely impressive and immensely affecting work. It is a very powerful story, and there's such a bitterness to it, and there's such an angst and a cynical outlook to it. It is in stark contrast to Don Juan, because whereas that story was cheeky, and kind of farcical, this is very, very pessimistic and dour. But it really does pack a punch, again, despite its brevity. So yeah, I think I'm going to give it an A minus. So Lord Byron's Cain. Have you read Cain? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with what I've said here today. And if you haven't read Cain, I could really recommend this. Honestly, if you want to get into Lord Byron stuff, if you want to read something that's not just like just poetry, but actually has like a narrative to it, then I would say definitely give this a go. It's a very, very good work, I think, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So yeah, I could really recommend Lord Byron's Cain. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.